Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. The sensor and communication technology associated with remote monitoring capabilities has proven to be both a time-saving and productivity-enhancing tool, as well as a potentially debilitating cyber defense vulnerability for the industrial sector. The issues stem from a combination of internal failures and the evolution of highly innovative criminals, which was recently assessed in Cyolo's State of Industrial Secure Remote Access report. Cyolo is a leading provider of secure access connection and monitoring solutions. Their report shows that larger industrial organizations can have over 50 remote users every day. This quantity of off-site employees logging into industrial control systems reinforces the top 3 areas of deficiency cited by respondents: a lack of visibility, insufficient user training, and weak internal access controls. Feeding these deficiencies are factors that include security personnel being unaware of all the internal and external remote users or backdoor access points, as well as a lack of monitoring solutions. We've spoken previously about access abuse and credential harvesting, so if a hacker was able to successfully deploy these types of attacks, they could use old or unmonitored accounts to potentially dwell within these systems indefinitely without being detected. Now, the report also spoke about some solutions, the top 2 being defense in-depth and network segmentation strategies. Our guest for today's episode will offer some color on these approaches while discussing the challenges stemming from remote access-based attacks. However, before we talk to him, we're excited to announce that Security Breach is being sponsored by Pentera. For more information on their cybersecurity solutions, you can go to pentera.io. It's now my pleasure to welcome Kevin Kumpf, Chief OT and ICS Security Strategist at Cyolo, to the program. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to Security Breach. Kind of jumping right into it, we're going to be talking a lot about remote access, and I thought one of the things we could do to get things going a little bit is just talk about how that's sort of unique within the industrial realm. When we talk about remote access and logging in, what we're looking at, the information we're sharing, a little bit unique of an environment. What does that mean from a security perspective, I guess, then?
What it means is it's more transient in nature. And by that, I mean, in the IT world, we have our infrastructures that are set up that they generally know their employees, their staff, and there's more of them. And you've built in your identity structures and things like that. Even contractors coming in are part of the environment. When we get into the industrial world, what we're really noticing is that a lot of it has become ad hoc. And in the past, what that meant is pre-COVID, engineers and people would be on your site. Granted, they'd be a contractor, but you'd physically notice them and see them. We'd also have things set up so that if you were coming from a specific office location, that you had IP addresses and other things that you could pin up a VPN to, which wasn't the best technology, but that's the way many companies did it. Now you have transient workers that can come from anywhere around the globe. And these workers are logging in at a moment's notice to access an industrial system in their environment. And many of the plant managers don't even know these people. They just say, I need something fixed. Let's move forward and make it, usable. And that's been the real challenge is, I call it the graying of OT. There's so many people that have retired from the space that you're seeing the lack of trained people that it's just, I need somebody to keep me up, get in here and fix it now.
Yeah. It's interesting. You bring up training. That obviously relates to the cybersecurity side of things as well. And actually, the report that you guys did, which was really interesting, can't recommend it enough, called out 3 really sort of deficiencies that remote access cybersecurity is facing. I'd really like to get your take on all 3. The first was a lack of visibility, another was insufficient user training, and the final one was weak access controls. So maybe we could talk a little bit about those, go through them one at a time. So when it comes to a lack of visibility, What type of problems is that creating? What are you seeing out in the market?
Well, lack of visibility can mean many different things to many different people. But to us, what the lack of visibility means is understanding your people process technology. And by that, what I mean is when you get into these industrial environments, you many times have people that would go to a jump post and everybody would congregate at that jump post and they would have shared logins and shared access because the devices downstream shared a credential. So not knowing who the user is, not knowing where they're coming from, having a shared credential on the back end where an audit log shows user one logged in, user one logged out over and over and over again doesn't give you any accountability or auditability. And then the jump hosts that were installed in many of these locations with the lack of OT resources, even from an IT perspective, you now have applications that are just put out en masse. And I can tell you, I don't know how many times I've seen shared programs like Zoom or other things put onto host because it was the quick way to get it done. And now we're going to use that tool because it's there.
It's interesting, there's a parallel here to the OT system as well with that lack of visibility from an attacker perspective. We're not always able to see who's in there all the time and how they're manipulating the system. What makes it so difficult from a remote access dynamic in terms of seeing simply who's logged in? This seems like kind of a basic concept. Why is it creating so many problems? Why are we having trouble seeing who's there or who's logged in?
Because the technology that people have put in has either been the tried and true, I'll go with a VPN type technology, which is a network layer connectivity, which you have the very significant fight of we don't want something on our endpoint device. And so therefore it's either has to be a client or something. So they say we'll come through IT. Or the other paradigm of this is that when these users are coming in, they're using antiquated technology. So they need a client server component and you're not checking the end devices. And so it's very easy to say we're going to throw up a VPN or we're going to use a universal gateway, a data diode, a one-way connectivity. But once again, we're talking network layer connectivity, which if you go to the next level down of the problem, which is lateral movement in this space, there truly is no microsegmentation. And that's one of the biggest things we hear is when somebody gets in my facility, once they get past that main gateway, that firewall or that VPN or unidirectional gateway, there is no segmentation. There is an open field to traverse.
Wow. It's interesting how a lot of these problems have similar genesis, if you will, similar beginning points. And some of those things are echoed in some of the other deficiencies that people cited in the report, talking about insufficient training and weaker access controls. Those two seem to kind of bleed together a little bit. Is it just a situation where we need to be smarter about remote access and develop more protocols for it? Are we just sacrificing security for the sake of time? What's kind of going on there with those two?
Well, you saw it in some legislation that the U.S. government tried to pass in HR 7777, which was they want to give industrial training away for free now, because you are seeing, especially at the advent of the Ukraine war and things, you are now seeing Russians and other activist states really taking advantage. And I see it day to day that if you look at a facility that has 300 or 400 plants globally, you'll have 6 or 7 OT security people. If you look at the IT world, you'll have 10 or 15 people covering 2, offices. With no people to cover, with exposures, it's really become the point of, not knowing the knowledge of what these devices do. And predominantly it's down to safety. It's not security, it's safety. And they're concerned that something could happen in these plants that could cause a major catastrophe on the human impact level more than anything.
No, it makes a ton of sense. So, we know these vulnerabilities are out there. We know internally, or at least as an industry, where some of the weaknesses are. What are the hackers, what are the bad guys doing then in exploiting some of these issues? What are some of the types of attacks we're seeing or maybe the approaches they're implementing?
The techniques really have, I can't say the techniques have changed from the IT to the OT world. What has changed is that they now realize that if they can get past the IT boundary into OT, that the vulnerabilities exist in the manufacturer components and in the architecture quite easily. So if you take lateral movement, you have to have that foothold. This can be exploiting public-facing sites. This can be phishing. This can be anything in those realms. But in reality, they've always been there in OT. It's just now that we've opened up a conduit to more people, there's more ways to exploit them. The other thing that's really happened in this space is they're realizing that manufacturers have used the same code over and over again for multiple products, and they've shared it with each other. So you're not patching, you're not maintaining, you don't want to have downtime. So things like spear phishing attacks, supply chain compromises where you hit IT and come to OT, or you open up a VPN, which now allows you unfettered access to local administration of the box or device. It's always been there. I just think now there's more, it's a low-hanging fruit, as people call OT security.
Yeah. Is it sort of the usual suspects in terms of the types of organizations that are using these vulnerabilities and coming in through remote access, or are you seeing some new players kind of go out there?
Yeah, you're seeing more nation-state attacks because, and you saw this back even in the days where they've gone after pipelines and even with centrifuges that they've gone after. But now they're realizing that there was just an incident in one of the Middle Eastern countries where they, for no reason, changed the chlorination of a pool, and the people got burned from that acidity in the water. I had a call earlier this morning with somebody that said, we need to start protecting our water supplies in the US. And I was like, that should be a given. But if you look at your towns and municipalities that control these water supplies, how many of them do you think really have people on to protect and are experts in water security for a small town?
Yeah. Is generating that expertise throughout the industry, regardless of size, is that a financial thing? Is that a training thing? Is it recruiting the right people? Where do we need to put the resources, I guess, to try to overcome that?
It's all three. I mean, when you look at people in high school right now that can come out with a cloud certification or a network certification or something else, and I think that that space is really cool and I can go out and make six figures instantly. Who wants to go back and say, I want to do something inside of a factory? And yet, when we were kids, we all wanted to play with robots and Legos and the cool stuff. But then you realize that, you know, the white collar world is where you have to be behind a desk and you have to be in IT. So getting the new people into the space, getting the people to understand how critical the training is in this space and why it's important, and breaking down that barrier of IT versus OT, which is huge, all lead to a better improvement for this space.
Interesting. You know, when it comes to implementing a lot of these security measures, protocols, standards, where does the onus lie in your opinion? Does this rely on the people that provide the solutions, the services, the hardware that people are implementing, the remote access communication platforms, or is it on the individuals who are installing it? Where does the onus need to go? Who needs to work harder there?
It's both, but I think you're seeing a shift in that. You know, the OPC Foundation, for example, they've just now started to implement sharing across devices. And from a security perspective, they will come out and tell you, we are not security experts. We are automation control experts. They're the ones that know exactly how to make a sensor fill a bottle of ketchup and stop at the right time, move the next bottle under it, package the entire thing, label it. They're very good at that. What they haven't been good at is the understanding of security sharing across an industry, which is very siloed. And it's also the point that that's not been their realm. It's been uptime, availability, and get a job done quickly. From a manufacturer perspective, meaning supply chain, putting it on the factory floor, that is the area that I see the biggest change. You've always had NERC, SIP, or NEI or other standards out that have really said you must do this. But even you're seeing changes there that are now saying, hey, those low assets, we should take care of those. And I think now they can take care of them once the manufacturers start to put things out that can be updatable, maintainable without risking downtime. So it crosses both boundaries.
It's interesting. We talk a lot about these standards, and I've always wondered, and maybe you have a better perspective on it, when it comes to a competitive advantage, when we're looking at manufacturers trying to grow their business, is having a lot of these IT or OT-based security standards in place, is there enough universal understanding of what they mean that it becomes, oh, this company doesn't have this standard in place, they're not qualified here, I'm going to do business someplace else? Is there something there yet?
No, there's not. There is too many standards in my estimation now. If you look at how in Europe NIS 1 and now it's NIS 2. We've put out more legislation in the United States regarding pipelines that came from the TSA, and everybody says, why is it coming from the TSA when this is a pipeline?
Yeah.
What we are finding is that it comes back to NIST IEC 62443, but how many people do you talk to that say, that's a wonderful standard, my company's not going to pay a couple $1,000s to let me download it?
Yeah.
And to me, when you read through the standards, they're subjective. When it says that you must retain logging information, people now turn around and say, what is quote unquote information? Because the data is not the issue. It's the context of how we use that data and how the context of we apply the standards.
So is there a solution here? Do we need, I'm sure you're not looking for more government involvement, but do we need more specific guidance from the government? Or is this something where private industry simply needs to do a better job of talking to each other and communicating?
Well, you brought it up. It's you're looking at it as guidance. Many people do. If you look at the people that come out from CISA, I'm involved in InfraGard and our organizations, we can provide quote unquote guidance. But if you look at what Europe's doing, where they're putting out directives, which means you don't do this, there's going to be penalties and fines. Mm-hmm. I spoke at a conference last week about, KPIs and KRIs for compliance. And they said, this is great, but nobody shares the hacks, the attacks, or any other information to improve it. They keep it hidden. So if you don't have that complete feedback loop, you're just collecting data. And one more standard on top of it saying thou should do this as opposed to saying thou shall do this just confuses it.
No, I'd agree. I mean, that's something I've talked a lot about on this program. Sharing more of that data on the attacks, people are reticent for numerous reasons, but until we start doing that, it seems like it's going to be difficult to really understand who we're fighting against to the extent that we need to anyway.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say that has become positive, and we saw it a couple of years ago when we saw the Huawei Hikvision type legislation of banning those products, finally realizing that our adversarial states are sadly people that we go to a local store and buy many of the items from out of that country. It really wasn't the smartest thing for us to ship semiconductor production and things overseas. When I cannot sit here and guarantee you factually, Jeff, that they have not put malware into those chips that at a date 2-3 years from now in the future, they're all going to shut down. Nobody can tell me that. And when there's only 2 manufacturers or 1 manufacturer of a chip and they come from one of those nation states, you have no trust, no matter how much security you put in. It really has to be bring those back shored to control.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that bleeds into all the supply chain issues that can pop up. We've talked a lot about secure by design at the component level too, but that can be subjective depending on how long is it going to be secure for and how do you upgrade it and patch it and things like that as well.
Yeah. I still have people out there that are using technology from 40 years ago. And I'm not joking. And you're not sitting there going, you don't believe it because it's true. But I also talk to manufacturers that say, in the past 10 years, I've had 15 hours of downtime, and those have all been scheduled. You're seeing Industry 4.0, which now says we're sending more and more data outside of the boundary, and we're not even assessing the risk of data privacy on that because they say, hey, it's just telemetry data, or it tells them when my lights go on and off. And yet we've seen in the real personal world, people taking things from your floor cleaning robots and getting home layout plans to attack a house based on what it is, or your home thermostat of, hey, they must be on vacation because the thermostat's set to 62 for the past 2 weeks. Any of that data is critical and it has to be taken as such.
No, I agree 100%. It circles back to the whole visibility element too. We have visibility into a lot of these systems, but we're not paying attention to some of the data. If there's a slight temperature spike, it was an anomaly, it didn't affect production. Well, that could be somebody probing your OT network to see how you respond to things or what's going to happen if they manipulate that more. So,
yeah, and that's the side of secure remote access that I think really can help us in what we're doing here at Cyolo. I do not view secure remote access as getting in only. To me, it is an ecosystem of data in and out. So if I can take, for example, some of our customers have a wind turbine. If a sensor goes off on that wind turbine, we can be notified and now get that access back into that wind turbine in the same product that we have out there with Cyolo. So you continually create a loop of control. And if I'm going to a business and I say, I can put our product in, or any vendor's product, from Cyolo, into that space, they look and say, I have a person that goes out there once, twice a year. Why does it matter? But if you can say, now I can give you real-time data off of a ship, a wind turbine, a rail car, a warehouse, a heating and cooling system in a federal facility, and let you notified immediately that you can take action, that is relevant.
Yeah. But as long as they're going to use the data, that's the second part of it that we always seem challenged with. We have the capability, but then it's using that in the way that we need to be efficient and more productive, but now to also be more secure, or to be looking at those things.
Collecting that data is a challenge that people have not really talked about. And I actually was speaking to a lawyer a couple of weeks ago that's in our space. And I said, if you take a company that is sending out data about how their components are working, or lighting systems, or anything else in that facility, they consider that non-sensitive, non-proprietary information. But if I can take that information now and collect it at one of the cloud providers or elsewhere and combine it with other people in the space that are using it, I now can extract relevant data. You apply AI to that, this is now can be turned as a weapon to understand the uses, the benefits, the flaws. And we're not even looking at that as, are we really treating that as privacy data? Because in the OT world, privacy and data classification don't exist in its purest form. It's more about safety.
That's a great point, and that's something we do need to talk about more, because the attackers are getting so much more complex and innovative in the way they go at things and collect data. They're so happy to get just a little bit here and a little bit there that then they can use to put it all together and really come at you and shut you down very quickly and very harshly. So it's a
exactly
good point.
Exactly, and that's being overlooked because we have no people that are doing data analytics in our space.
So, Kevin, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. You touched on a little bit what some of the things that Cyolo does, but maybe you can go into a little more depth in terms of some of the folks you work with, especially on the industrial sector, and some of the different things that you offer to help combat some of these issues we've been talking about.
Sure. So what we offer is we basically offer what I call application layer granular access to environments. And we have termed it digital identity management in a unified capacity. And what that means is we will get you access to your environment. We are an outbound connection from your environment. The nice thing about it is that our software platform can run on anything from a Raspberry Pi up to full rack servers. So you can use the same consistent platform. And what we really provide you is an outbound connection to where users can come in through a web browser. And I call it sort of like an Oreo cookie. On the front layer of that cookie, that wafer, we do multi-factor authentication fully built into the platform or tied into an existing vendor of identity access. On the back wafer, we point to your internal resources. You don't need to put up a jump box. You don't need to put up anything else. And we apply basically access on a port basis, IP basis, so it's granular at the application resource. And then in the middle, we provide policy. And policy allows the user to do certain things, to come in at given times, to be supervised, to be recorded, but also to be denied cut, copy, paste, file upload, download. And then the last major component is we vault those weak credentials. So that means if you have an HMI that has a shared credential account to it, we can fully air-gapped multi-factor authenticate you, give you an icon on your desktop, launch that icon, you do not see the shared credentials, and we can record, supervise, and put controls around an application that has none of these features to it, all without change. Anywhere you would desire, 3G, cellular, whatever, as well as full bandwidth. That, to me, is now we have digital identity.
No, sounds very intriguing. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that were mentioned in the report that you guys put out. Talking about some of the solutions specifically. In this program, we tend to get a little bit bogged down in some of the challenges, but there are some interesting solutions put out there that I'd like to get your take on. The first one was an approach talking about defense in depth. Maybe you could define that a little bit. Some of these terms get defined and assessed a little bit differently. What does that mean to you or from Cyolo's perspective?
So defense in depth really means taking things across the people, process, technology levels and understanding where your weaknesses are, where your gaps are, and putting measurable controls around them that you can now keep looking at and improve. And one of the areas that has been the weakest link, I think, in this depth is where that boundary sits. Most people want it to sit at their level, zone 3, level 3, if you're going to talk to IEC or Purdue model, and say we're going to put something at 3.5, which is in your DMZ gateway. And behind that, once you get down to your 0s, 1s, and 2s, you're fully open because they've had no way to segment. And the reason they don't segment is because of performance. So deterministic networking, meaning I know something's going to happen every 6 milliseconds. So you throw security in there, you throw another layer, you're going to change my production, you're going to increase delay, and now things don't work properly. So there's the infrastructure. There's also the people of we're letting people in that we don't have full control over. We need to add defense in that. And then it's the policy. And I can tell you that I spoke at a conference several months ago, and we asked the question, how do you know if your environment is underneath attack? And one of the biggest CEOs from one of the major corporations in the industrial space said, my staff calls me at 3 a.m. to wake me up. And everybody laughed like, oh, that's great. But when we really got down to it, we asked the question of, how do you know? And finally, I had to answer the question for them, said, it's a deviation from your baseline. And they were all shocked, like, what is a baseline? If you don't have a baseline, you can have no defense in depth.
Yeah, it goes back to paying attention to all that data that you've spent all that money to procure and understand and have access to, and applying it from a security perspective that people just seem to underappreciate. Appreciate that. One of the things that came across too, and actually, well, before I go on to my next question, I want to circle back a little bit. You said in working through and assessing the situation and understanding your weaknesses. I'm curious to know, how do people react when you present them with these weaknesses? Is it a head in the sand type of thing? Do they not want to deal with it? They just throw their hands up because they don't have the money to deal with it? What is the response? And man, hopefully it's improving, I guess.
It is improving because people realize now that before, when you look at a manufacturer, I've worked in industrial manufacturers, I've worked in healthcare on the OT side, I've worked in energy on the OT side. A plant manager is the key person here in many of these instances. They make the determination of many, many things because, you don't even have quote unquote OT CISOs in many major organizations. You have deputy security directors because we can't have 2 CISOs. But when you go to them, it's the old guns versus butter type approach in the government, which is, great, security is important, but I have to pave my parking lot. I have to put a roof up here. I have to deal with OSHA or anything else out there, or the FDA to get the product out. That was at the major facilities. When you get to the little part suppliers that supply the bearing, the wing nut, the washer, whatever component it is, security to them is really not high on the list because they're a cost center. They're not a cost-making center because I'm just a little part. Now it's changed because they realize that I can go in and ruin that one part for their production line, and that trickles down the entire thing. So it really has to start at the core components, as in knowing your baseline to say every little widget is important, and every widget builds into a product you put out, and you have to look at security across the same thing in a balanced effect.
Well, that is encouraging to hear that there's greater understanding of that dynamic, especially with some of the smaller manufacturers out there. That's encouraging. One of the other things that came across as a potential solution or a problem is, and I actually never heard this before, a lot of legacy systems don't have the capability of installing or making a multi-factor authentication process possible. I thought that was really interesting in terms of wanting to implement MFA, but sometimes manufacturers can't because the new stuff and the old stuff just doesn't connect properly. I was kind of wondering if you've dealt with that situation before or what that represents for the industry.
Yeah, and you can go out there. I'm not going to tell people where to go out there, but you can go out there and find any of the manufacturers, including in many of their documentations, that list the username and password right in the documentation. And there was a list published several years ago as, hey, here's the manufacturer, here's the password, here's this. And in an industrial setting, or even in IT settings, as we know, how many times you've gone in and the password's default. System was re-imaged, rebuilt. There wasn't a process in the checklist to do it, and the password never got changed. Well, in the OT world, with lack of password management platforms, with lack of centralized management, and with shared accounts that anybody needs to walk up to that system and do something immediately, changing a password can have devastating effects. So if you look at what's now coming out with 2MFA, they're saying we have to multi-factor. However, if you look at some of the guidance that's come out of CISA and others, you will see on one slide that it says one of the weakest challenges out there now is MFA, because people are approving it in the middle of the night, not looking at their phones and just saying yes. And on another slide of how do we prevent security risks, MFA comes up again as a solution to the problem. It's the people. And so, I mean, it's not the tool. And that to me was shocking to see that it's a risk as well as a benefit. The other part is that you're not going to change these systems out in many of these facilities ever. So now it's that defense in depth where you put the perimeter around it, you get the people arm's length away from the devices in the factories or the facilities, and you make everybody go to something like Cyolo, which now gives them MFA, gives them auditability capabilities and manageability of users. And if a user leaves, you don't have to change a weak password. TSA directive is exactly a prime component of that, where they said if you had a shared services account, you had to change the password when somebody left. If you notice, they sort of changed that interpretation to said, or compensating control.
Yeah. Interesting. One of the last solutions I want to get to that really surprised me in the report is it talked about endpoint solutions being one of the least frequently suggested solutions or implemented solutions. And that surprised me from an OT perspective, because that's where we see a lot of attacks coming in through. Again, you've implemented new technology on the plant floor from a production perspective. Security wasn't turned on, for lack of a better term, and yet that's not really a focal point right now. To me, that seems very concerning.
It isn't, and it is. That's where the OPC Foundation and others are coming into saying, if I see something on one device, I can talk through some of the back-end OT protocols to reach that device and tell it to do something. The problem with XDRs or any of those other technologies is they need to continually be updated. And so that means you need an outbound connection to update. That also means that you now put the risk in where uptime and safety are the most important things. If I have a process in a chemical facility, for example, and I notice something that's an anomaly, and the XDR something shuts that off, I can have a significant risk of that valve being in an open position.
Yeah.
In the IT world, you look and you say, okay, if I shut something off, that's great. Maybe it's a transaction, we'll redo it. So it's the trust, it's the understanding, and it's the knowing that these products are, you may say in the IT world, oh, that takes, 2 gig of memory and this much space. Look at some of the devices that are on the factory floor in the OT world that run on something the size of an old Commodore 64, do a job well, but they have no way to ingest something that large and say, you're going to sit here and slow down my performance and cause me risk. So it's a risk rewards benefit.
Yeah, and that's where we get into some of those dangers when it comes to sort of cut and pasting some of those IT approaches and bringing them over to the OT side of things that they just don't translate well. And I think that's what a lot of, again, small to mid-sized manufacturers are trying to do, whether it be to cut costs or just because they don't have the in-house expertise. But it can definitely lead to some issues.
Yeah, and it's funny because my role here at Cyolo isn't to be the smartest person in the room. That will never be me. my role here at Cyolo is to get these individuals that want to talk to somebody that understands OT, that's sat in their chair and knows the risks, and not just says, oh yeah, put in an IT solution, go to the cloud, it's great. The line I always use is, you can tell an OT person versus an IT person in this space, not by the terminology, but by the understanding that the IT world is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The OT world is the exact opposite. It's AIC. Availability is key. And there is actually an S in front of that for safety. And people look and say, if you understand that, you understand my world, you understand that safety and availability are the key components here, because confidentiality of the data is way down the line. IT world, confidentiality of the data. So if you can bridge that paradigm in your thinking, you can understand the space, but you have to shift that paradigm.
Well, that's well said. Very well said. So kind of winding things down here a little bit, Kevin, as we look forward next maybe 12, 18 months or so, are there any big trends that you're seeing that are going to impact either industrial cybersecurity as a whole, or maybe more specifically when we look at remote access?
There's a combination of both. There's a combination, whether we want it or not, of IT technologies coming into the OT space because of lack of people. There's also the understanding of more automation to security. And I find it funny because industrial control systems are built, the plants we protect, on automation. Everything is automated. If you look at security in an industrial facility or a nuclear plant or wherever it is, how automated is security? You don't have SOARs, you don't have SIMs, you don't have other things. So now that all these technologies are coming in that can help them, there is still that man in the middle, and that's many things we work with customers on. And they say, you know what, if I could aggregate all this data, make it relevant, put it into a SIM type device, give me eyes on glass of what's really going on so I can make an operator level decision as opposed to a automated decision, that's the first step. You see that many times where you have physical keys now to shut off and on remote access tools. You know physically that it's there, the operator can turn it on, but that's a manual process of notification and availability. And the last thing I think that we're seeing more of is we're going to see more of a people process technology integration where we're going to turn on ports and services on firewalls, applications like Cyolo for given periods of time, credentials for a given period of time. And then when that user session is done, an operator is going to be able to go and hit one button, turn off the access, turn off the application, turn off the controls that get to it, because that is one of the weakest vectors, is the availability of access across the environment. So I think that will change the paradigm immensely.
So is that kind of like a just-in-time approach? I think we've used that term before.
Yeah, fully. But now we're tying in the network access. We're tying in the application access. We're tying in the user access. We're tying in the ability to record those sessions and giving them all that data at once, that an operator can say, I look, the user's done. I want to close it all off. Where's our weakest link? Weak credentials that are open, ports that are always open that you can now infiltrate and exfiltrate.
I want to circle back. When you talked about some of that automation into security and safety, are we basically taking a lot of the foundations of artificial intelligence, just not going the final step and letting it make the decision? Is that essentially what we're trying to work towards?
I wouldn't say it's AI, because AI is a scary place right now, as you know. But it is getting the OT people to understand that IT technologies can be helpful as long as we're not automatically going in and patching everything ad hoc like Patch Tuesday. So it's saying, look, there's tech that can help you. How we use and control that tech is truly the place. I'd say from an AI perspective, we already have a lot of the AI built into the OT space, because with ladder logic and other type of technology program, availability and coding, I can now take and do anything on a production line. I can now take and mix things precisely every single time so that your beverage or your food is consistently cooked or consistently tastes the same. So there's a lot of that already built in. What we're now saying is, let's use that same thinking and tie in security and just make that part of the puzzle so that it flows with everything else.
No, makes a ton of sense. Last question I have for you, Kevin, and I mean this seriously. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. You're extremely knowledgeable on all of the challenges that are out there from an OT cybersecurity perspective. How do you sleep at night? When you're confronted with all of these challenges and all the bad stuff that can happen, what gives you a sense of peace on what's going on right now?
I think the biggest sense of peace out there is that we are finally starting to talk about this. And sadly, it's taken some bad events, but as I say in cybersecurity, my kids say to me, "Dad, I want to go into your field." And I'm like, "That's great. I don't want you to relive the things that I've had to live. I want you to learn from what we've done and improve upon it." And if you look at medicine or anything else out there that is truly a science, you have things where you learn and learn and learn until you improve. So right now, by sharing information, by saying that it's okay to talk about that you were hacked, and it's okay to talk about what happened in a free form with others, that's improving. So to me, knowledge sharing, information, your session here, getting the word out to others to say, it's okay that something happened. How do we handle it?
Couldn't agree more. Very, very well said. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. This has been outstanding. Anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, I just want to thank you for the time. And I want to thank people like yourself that are getting the word out there and helping others to know that they can reach out via email, Slack, phone, whatever they want to do, and say, "Hey, I need help to understand this. How do I position this to management? How do I get these tools or technologies or techniques to be more effective in my world?" I think without people like yourself, it doesn't happen. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Happy to do it. Again, thanks so much for the time. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the things that Cyolo is doing, you can check them out at their website, cyolo.io. It's spelled Cyolo. And the website, just add a .io on there. Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Kevin Kumpf, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.